Collect and categorize, research and reflect, apply and arrange, fashion and flavour. Let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt. Charles Swindoll there, if you think the gathering of biblical facts and standing up with a Bible in your hand will automatically equip you to communicate well, you're deeply mistaken. It will not. You must work at being interesting. Boredom is a gross violation. Being dull is a grave offence. And irrelevance is a disgrace to the gospel. Too often, these three crimes go unpunished, and we preachers are the criminals. The first person I worked with after university in a church, Robin Gamble, who was an absolute character, could say some outrageous things. He used to say this: the greatest heresy is to make God look boring. The greatest heresy is to make God look boring. But if you speak to, in my culture, the average person on the street, they will immediately, when they think about God, religion, church, they will often think of that word boring. What a terrible thing. 3 flavour enhancers, okay? When I'm at home, because I love Indian food, I normally put dried chilies in everything. So I just pour chilies in everything. Anyway, 3 flavour enhancers. Firstly, flavour with illustrations and quotes. Illustrations and quotes. Illustrations are the window, often, to the message. Jesus always used stories and illustrations like these when speaking to the crowds. In fact, he never spoke to them without parables. And we'll talk about that because I've got a number of illustrations which I want to use, so we can talk about that. Never make a point without a picture. Never make a point without a picture. But the key is the fit factor. It has to fit. And that's another. We've talked a little bit about that as well. So here are some suggestions. Some of these I think I'm going to probably start scrapping because they're too old. But throw away old illustration books. You can still buy these books of illustrations, and a lot of them are old and I don't use them now. I used to use them, but now I don't. Best sources: TV, internet, magazines, films. The best is actually life. I'm always looking. And if you start to become attuned to looking around for illustrations, and you will find them. That's what Jesus did. Jesus did that. So when you read the parables, Jesus, you could just imagine, Jesus was walking, it says he was walking along with his disciples, and then he told them the story of the sower and the seed. And you could just imagine, they were walking along, and there in the next field was this guy sowing. Jesus looked and said, "Let me tell you the story." You could just imagine that happening. All his illustrations, all his parables actually, and I think Stuart has said this, linked up with common occurrences. So that Jesus was aware of his surroundings and was able to use what was happening around him and effectively turn them into very, very clever parables, very clever stories.
Very interesting. Right? The time that he told that story, I think, was planting time.
Yeah. So, anyway, we can do the same. Check your motive when using personal illustrations. Check your motive when using personal illustrations, and linked with that, get permission from your family to do this. Now, okay. Some preachers, it seems, think that God has given them children for the sole purpose of lots of great sermon illustrations. And in fact, my older son, bless him, now thanks me for this. And he said, "Dad, I'm so glad that you never used me in any of your sermon illustrations when I was young. So I refused to do that." Yeah? So you've got to check personal Am I using this personal illustration to make me look good? I would probably tend to want to use illustrations which make me look bad, personally. They poke fun at me. That's actually quite powerful. Illustrations which poke fun at me. Yeah? So we just need to be careful here, and again about family. As well as that, I think, I'll give you this as an example. I find churches, and they make assumptions, and the preacher makes an assumption. This is the assumption: everyone is married and everyone has children. But that's not the case in our situation. And actually, if you make that assumption, then actually you can isolate those, A, who are not married, and B, do not have children. And in our culture, it has been described that church is a very dangerous place for single people. Interesting, isn't it? Because the assumption is that everyone is in a relationship, and everyone's got kids. So we need to be careful the sort of illustrations we use, because sometimes an illustration which seems good can also be excluding. Yeah? And what helped us was a friend of ours, Kate and myself, who was single, and she helped us. But I meant I had to hear actually what she said. So I had to hear what she was saying. But I agreed with her. So we're very careful. So if I do say an illustration with kids, this is how I'll say, if you have ever had kids, you will know, but I'm not assuming. The other way of saying it would be, you'll know, of course, because you've had kids, that this is true, but because you might not have had. Okay, yeah? So it's being very careful about the illustrations we use. Tell the truth, don't exaggerate. That fish you caught, how big was it? Well, it was about that. Actually, it was think through your transitions. This actually, the power of the illustration is probably going to be linked to the transitions in and out. Eliminate non-essential details. The shorter is better than longer. If you listen to comedians, they know how to tell a joke. They know how to tell a story. And obviously they have the discipline of TV or theatre, but they compress it. And the funniest stories, are most powerful, are often those which are using the fewest amount of words. Which again illustrates the fact that the less prepared I am, the longer I'll preach. The less prepared I am as a preacher, the danger is the longer I'll preach. The preparation helps me to be refined. It helps me to be targeted. I'm thinking these things through specifically. And use dramatic stories sparingly. You can't cry every week. Otherwise, you've got to be very careful of this, because this is emotional manipulation. Now, a good communicator will know how to do that. And I have to be very cautious. And sometimes there are stories which I won't use at a particular time, not because it isn't a great story, but I just feel the danger is I'm manipulating people emotionally. Because actually, in the end, it's all very well for people to burst into tears. That actually might stop them responding to the gospel. Okay, this is about ministry. If I'm in a ministry situation and I'm praying for people, and every time someone comes and I pray for them, they fall over, they're slain in the Spirit. You think that's great. If that happens every time, I'm thinking, what's happening here? Yeah? Because actually some of these things, a too great emotional response will stop people responding clearly to the gospel. Yeah? But sometimes, it is. Sometimes we had this lady from North Korea, which was a privilege with a translator. She'd escaped. And it was harrowing. But that was right, because the subject matter was deadly serious. Confronted with the persecuted church in the hardest country in the world to be a Christian. But you can't do that every week, can you? You just wring people dry. Flavour with humour. Now, I like doing this. A cheerful heart is good medicine. The Son of Man came enjoying life. The large crowd listened to Jesus with delight. Do people listen to me with delight? I like humour, but you do need to know how to you need to know how to tell a joke. So I would say if you can't tell a joke, then don't try. Okay? So I quite like humour, and actually the humour that works best is it seems to be a little bit slapstick. It seems to be the sort of banter you might have with people. Actually, I've normally worked that out in advance because I know how some people are going to respond, and we can have fun doing that. All I can say is you can either do it or you can't. So you just need to recognise what you can and what you can't do. Humour, actually, you can shift sometimes from humour to a serious point very quickly, and that can be a very powerful rhetorical device. But again, you need to be careful about emotional manipulation. So I like humour. Martin Lloyd-Jones didn't. And he said, in his commentary on Matthew 5, he said, and I could imagine him saying this with a Welsh accent, he said, we need to be honest here to see that it never says that Jesus laughed. Jesus would have been a serious man. We need to beware of frivolity. Now, that's part of his background. Now, actually, when you look at it, children loved being around Jesus. Why did children love being around Jesus? You can guarantee it wasn't because he was somber and never smiled. It was probably because of the opposite. Kids don't like being around somber people, do they?
No.
Anyway, so flavour with humour. Flavour with special features. Again, it's a cultural issue, and you do need to be aware of cultural issues, especially if you're in the mission field. What is appropriate in one culture might be highly offensive to another culture. So, here are some examples. Testimonies or interviews. And sometimes in a message, even in the middle of a message, we've had an interview. I quite like interviews rather than testimonies for this reason. An interview, it means I can direct what the person is saying a bit more. And I don't want that necessarily to go on for hours and hours. There's a reason why I want that interview, and it actually helps the other person too. Sometimes I say to the person, could you write it out first? Because I don't want them to start, I actually don't want them to process this in front of couple of hundred people. Yeah? There's a reason for this interview. And that can be a very powerful tool. Because, to put it crudely, a satisfied customer is always more credible than the paid salesman. I am the paid salesman. I am. I'm paid by the church. That's my job. My job is to stand up the front and say these things. But if you get someone to say, this is what I've experienced of God, people, and frankly, that they'll remember. They won't remember what I say. They'll remember what the other person says. And part of that, of course, is being aware of people, isn't it? It's this relational issue. Drama sometimes can be quite handy. And I can remember years ago, I went to Northern Ireland with a YWAM team, and I was speaking in a mission, and basically we interspersed my messages with drama clips, which YWAM used to do. Do they still do drama? Yeah. It's a YWAM thing. And dance. I have trained in all the best ballet schools. Now, film clips, we use in our situation film clips, and I want to use a film clip tomorrow. So we do that, and we have a laugh doing that. I have a library now of a lot of film clips. Because actually, filmmakers are the modern storytellers. They do tell stories very well. But you do need to be aware of the cultural issues there. I've done a lot of this in India, and I've had to be a little bit more careful, where still you have some churches where Christians don't watch films. So you just need to be aware of that. Though I had a group of pastors, and we were doing this stuff with the pastors, and I showed, because I like Bollywood films, Indian films. So I thought, let's do it. So I showed this clip from one of my favourite movies called Mehu Na. And although the official line was, we don't go to the cinema, they'd all seen the film. And you saw people smile. But we've sometimes, and I've been caught. There's a film. I forgot what it is. Is it called K2? Anyway, it's
with the dog.
No. Kate, the mountain.
Yeah.
And actually, it's a rubbish film apart from the opening sequence. And the opening sequence is a father with his two adult children. They're rock climbing, really hard rock climbing. And to cut a long story short, there's an accident, and the father sacrifices his life for the children by cutting the rope. So he falls. It's very powerful.
Isn't that Vertical Limit?
Thank you! Vertical Limit, that's the movie. It's a rubbish movie, actually, but it's a really great opening. And so, and it's the first 5 minutes of the movie as the opening titles are going on. And so the final shot of this clip is you see the father hit the ground. Now, the point was sacrifice. The point was the father gives his life for the children. It's this sacrifice thing. And so we showed this, and then I was going to speak. It was about the cross. I had to wait. I had to wait probably about a minute, 60 seconds, because there were people choking. And because I was aware, I'd seen the clip many times, I'd seen the film, I was familiar with it, but I forgot the impact it was going to make on people. And so I actually had to wait a bit. So sometimes you do have to realise not just with movies, but with what you're saying, you have to be aware of the impact this is going to make. Sometimes, I think they probably do it on American TV now, if there is something in a programme which might really affect people, after the programme they're saying, if you've been affected by watching this, ring this number. And so we have to be aware sometimes of what we're doing. And that also includes just our general, if we're talking about something really like forgiveness, it might be that you say, look, we have raised here some really deep and maybe some very painful memories. By all means, come to the front and we'll pray for you. But if you want to see me during the week or see one of the team, you get in touch with us, yeah? So That makes sense. Sorry, I've just gone off on one there. Team preaching. I think we've done that a few times. You do that in wrestling, tag team wrestling, where you have, and I think you can do that. I've done that. We did a series on relationships, and one of my staff members, who's older than me, but she's single, and I spoke for 10 minutes, and then she spoke on singleness, and it was very powerful. And so we shared, and we've done that a few times, and that's worked quite well. And I could imagine from a YWAM perspective, if you go in a team, you could do that, couldn't you? So it's just an idea. Music, though, we need to be aware that what is important for you musically might not communicate to someone else. And I've also discovered that, and I think Jody said this, that if I was doing this, it's easier to show a video than listen. It doesn't seem to work if you've got a large group of people just to listen to something. What I have done before is I've used musical examples, going back to the Tchaikovsky thing, and what I did once, we did a series on Psalms of Lament, and we looked at sometimes there is music which is almost a lament. It's the musical style, and we showed a number of, and it was via YouTube, so it was a video, but with just little snippets of different pieces of music which expressed lament, and that worked quite well. But it was on YouTube. We did it. I think in all of this, it's getting addicted to seeing people's lives changed by Jesus, and we need to be creative. And all of this, a lot of this is being creative, isn't it? Collect and categorize, research and reflect, apply and arrange, fashion and flavour. And the key in the end, don't forget, it's we're dealing with Scripture, that's the heart of this. So don't forget the heart of this. But then you sense what God's Word wants to say. How can we best communicate that? Okay?